there is this assumption that all we have to do is go through real crisis and then we will change. But that's one of the very things that doesn't take account of our psychology and the psychology of resistance and denial. The power of this instinct that says, no, I've got to survive. The harder it gets, the more people are going to want to survive unless they've gone through some sort of shift in orientation. And that's very scary. I think that's very scary. You only have to look at history to see what happens when people feel threatened.
Hello and welcome to Further Reaches, the podcast where we seek to understand what lies beyond the edge of our current understanding. I'm your host, Kaz Tanner, and in this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Maiteny. Paul was the lecturer in a course I took last year called Transpersonal Eco-Psychology. I took this class because I was really fascinated in trying to more deeply understand our human relationship to planet Earth. And why do we intellectually know that our behaviors are causing the system to break down, causing ecological crisis, but we're not significantly changing our behaviors and actions? So we are going to touch on the transformative power of our everyday choices, the ancient wisdom that we've ignored for too long, and we're going to explore the critical question of what is our role as humans in the life of planet Earth. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Paul Maiteny is an ecologist, anthropologist, ecosystemic-transpersonal psychotherapist, and spiritual accompanier because of three questions that have concerned him since childhood. Why are we so cruel to each other? How come we are killing off Earth and its species? How do we and how do I fit into this beautiful Earth? Seeking to understand these questions has shaped the direction of his research and practice in practical nature conservation and ecology, ecological education, and human resistance to converting declared values and priorities into everyday life behavior. He now prefers life as an independent researcher, but has previously researched at Oxford and Open Universities, University College London, and Bocconi Management School in Milan. For 25 years, he taught a master's degree on education for sustainability, and he currently teaches transpersonal eco-psychology for the Aleph Trust and Liverpool John Moores University. Paul, hi, welcome to the Further Reaches podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for being on. To start with, I'd love to hear more about your childhood inspiration and the evolution of that interest over time.
Right. Well, I had these three questions. I can't explain the mystery of why these questions came to me. As far as I know, they didn't come to my siblings. But they came to me. Why are we so cruel to each other, extending into why are we so cruel to our co-inhabitants in Earth? I'd like to say in planet Earth, because it reminds us that we're part of it, without apparently a second thought to making these other species and habitats extinct. And the third question came, so I think in a way those were my two first psychological questions, and ecological, clearly. The third one was my first, on hindsight, these are not the words, of course, I used as a 7-year-old, but on hindsight, the third one was my first spiritual question, transpersonal question, which came from, as a child, seeing the Earthrise photograph of, from, I think it was Apollo 8. And I like to remember that probably, and I can feel this, I can feel it every time I say it still. The first time that the planet Earth, colour photograph of planet Earth was ever taken in the history, as far as we know, of the universe. Now that's quite an awesome thought, I think. And I can remember other people being fascinated with the moon, and I was fascinated with this Earth, this beautiful blue, fluorescent, almost pearl of a thing that all of my experience would be on. I couldn't experience anything anywhere else. And I realized even then, I was less than 10 years old. I can remember even then thinking or knowing that planet Earth operates in a sort of dynamic balance, that this was a unity, this was a one thing. And it seemed that the problems on Earth came from this species that I was a member of, that I am a member of. And that bemused me. Why? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? But that led me to another question, because I knew we were a species, I knew we were a biological animal. And so I asked, well, where do we fit in to this planet? Where do I fit in? And many, many, many years later, although it started when I was 14, I started to recognize that in spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions, cross-culturally, a key question has been that, where do we fit in? Not only how do I have an experience, but how do we actually convert that experience into action, behavior, meaningful action and behavior?
Yeah, I'd love to hone in on the aspect that you mentioned about thinking about where we as a species on planet Earth fit in. I think it's quite a prevalent perception that humans are some sort of cancer or like a virus on the planet. And so, what are your thoughts on this?
The thing is that the way my analysis of things has led me to the point of recognizing that we have a big choice about whether we live our lives to try and find our functional place in the ecosystem, or we draw on the ecosystem for our own self-orientated interests. And when we do that, I think even the analysis I've presented and the various things I've written does actually point to being like a virus. I think a virus more than a cancer, because a virus is, I know this is a controversial point, but a very, very primitive, very, very, when I say primitive, I mean early, a very early in evolutionary terms organism. And we've had the coronavirus, right? And if we were to ask, if we could ask the coronavirus, what is your purpose and meaning in life? Well, we can empirically see that what it does is it grows. It grows, it reproduces, it takes opportunities to, as we understand it, or some people understand it, cross-species barriers, any way that it can spread and grow. And in doing that, I think it is exhibiting a really basic instinct, what the psychoanalysts call the id, an instinct for survival, for growth, because we hear even in economics these days, well, we have to grow to survive. It is a kind of a cultural expression of a biological impulse that we share with every other species, even a tree. I'm looking out of my window at a tree. A tree grows in order to maximize the amount of light energy, sunlight energy, that it can synthesize for itself through photosynthesis, convert into food, into sugar, grow and reproduce. The only limits on that The only limits, the constraint on that growth is the amount of sunlight energy that it can absorb naturally. We have an extra source of sunlight energy that is thousands, I don't know what the actual figure is, but thousands, millions of times more powerful than raw sunlight converted through the food chains, from green plants to herbivores to carnivores, which would constrain us if we were only limited by that energy. But we have fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas. Before that, forests. This is, as it were, fossilized sunlight in the case of fossil fuels. And so that has given us the opportunity that we have chosen to take big time to run rampant with this instinct. This is how it seems to me it is. And in individual biological survival terms, we're the most successful species of Earth. But because of this extra supply of energy, and which in turn creates this illusion, this imaginary idea that we can grow infinitely, which every species would do if it could, but it can't. But this has given us the idea that we can. And so we've become this threat. It's saturated the threat to everything else.
Yeah. So we've lost the natural constraints on our growth, which is ultimately putting our survival into threat.
Well, we haven't actually lost them. Biologically, we haven't lost them. Ecologically, we haven't. We're still constrained by that. But our intellect, our cleverness, our technology has been applied to finding extra sources of sunlight, so that we've created this illusion that we've escaped it. There's a series of documentaries that were shown in 1992, which I've shown people ever since, on the Vimeo. I put them on Vimeo, which describes this very well. Prisoners of the Sun, it's called.
Those videos are really good. I highly recommend checking out Paul's Vimeo so you can watch those. I remember in your course, Paul, learning about how the greenhouse effect was essentially discovered in like 1824. Yet we have known this rationally for so long, but we're not actually like enacting meaningful change. So what do you think is going on there? Why is this like factual information not enough to change people's minds or to promote better strategies for sustainability?
Because I think, again, the power of the imagination, the imaginary, applied in this instinctual way, that it's all about us. It's me, I, me, mine, in George Harrison's infamous words. It's all about us. And so we have to use our intellect and our ingenuity to satisfy what is a really basic, early instinct for growth. And I think, that's then elaborated through belief, through whole belief systems, whole philosophies, to justify ourselves. And I think belief is much more powerful. I don't remember who said this first, but the belief is more powerful than knowledge in terms of what we do. So at that time, beginning of the Industrial Revolution, this was like miraculous, this discovery of fossil fuels, the inventions that it precipitated, that it stimulated. This was going to, well, as we know, make us developed. We were going to become comfortable. This was evolution, and the evolutionary theory was often used to justify this. This was seen as a continuation, as indeed it was in the sort of biological terms, the survival of the fittest, which was not originally Darwin's term, by the way. It was Herbert Spencer, an economist, philosopher. So that was the priority. That became the priority, to improve our standards of living, to profit, grow. Growth was the priority. I think this is why, and all the way up to, it's just really about 10, 15 years ago, not as much as 15, that finally recognition of planetary heating, I think I'm going to call it, planetary heating, has really become mainstream. And the result of that, in many respects, has been a deepening of the resistance and the resistance to change in our actual core meanings and behaviours. And this I find really, really worrying. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you. So why do you think that as a species we have so much resistance to change? And what can we do to adjust our beliefs to make it more meaningful to want to live in a way that is sustainable?
I'm not sure we have resistance to change per se. After all, from agricultural times to industrial, to advanced capitalism, market capitalism as we have now, that's enormous change in a certain respect, but it's change all in one direction. I think the resistance we have is to what the anthropologist Gregory Bateson called second order change, a change in the assumptions that the changes we have put in train are based on. So it's a change in actually, I talk about the basic choice as being a consuming mode of finding meaning and a contextualizing mode of finding meaning. The consuming mode being growth, self-interest. It's all about me or us, because the us, it's also the us, whether it be family, town, identity generally, include all the way up to species. And that is what we change constantly to try and squeeze more out, get more out of it, out of the rest of nature, essentially. Prisoners of the Sun emphasizes this very much. The other choice that we have, which I think is reflected within the wisdom traditions throughout cultures, throughout time, is what I call the contextualizing mode, where instead of it's all for me, I use this gesture, consuming, for consuming and growing. It's this gesture. It's, wow, I'm actually part of this. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it beautiful? Like that 7-year-old experience had. I wonder how I fit in. So how can I be a member, a functional member of this body that I'm part of? That's the change that I think is that we are hugely resistant to. And I think it's simply because the other mode, this mode, has billions, anyway, millions of years of inheritance of energy behind it, of inheritance, if you like. Our ancestors going back to the viruses, right? This is what drove them. This is the basic instinct, basic drive. And we use all sorts of cultural elaborations and cleverage. I like to use the cleverage to find more, to leverage more and more ways of continuing along this path. It's a cultural elaboration on the survival instinct, on the id. The Sufis talk about, or some schools of Sufism talk about, two basic motivations in instinctual motivations: survival, protection from harm, in other words, and pursuit of pleasure, which of course pleasure is mostly to do with reproduction, sexual. There's another motivation they talk about, which I'll come back to, which corresponds with the contextualizing mode, but I'll come back to that perhaps.
In your course, you had a phrase that resonated a lot with me, which was survival and style. This idea that, previously we're motivated by seeking shelter and food and reproduction. But now in our modern day, we still have those instinctual impulses kind of unconsciously motivating us. And now it might be seeking status or, wanting to not feel shame. Could you kind of talk a bit more about those like unconscious forces that might be shaping our decisions?
I've been very interested in the parallels between wisdom traditions. And that phrase, survival in style, comes from a theologian, a sort of mystical theologian called John Shea. And as soon as he used it, I thought that really sums it up. And there's a sort of almost a comical element to it, because it's a survival of style as well. It's like style is what really matters. How do I keep up, the old way of putting it is, how do I keep up with the Joneses? Can I get the right sort of, whatever it might be, take your pick, trainers, cars, houses, kitchens, you name it, that my peers, the peer group I'm part of, kind of expects of me. And I'm going to keep coming back to the same motivation. I think it is a cultural, we have this desire for growth, or we have desire. Let's just say we have desire for something. And I think in human terms, it's a desire for meaning in life, and who am I, identity. And that then gets clothed in cultural beliefs, meanings, values. You know what I mean by that, I think. I think most people here will know what I mean by that. Just look at your own. What cultural clothing of beliefs, meanings, values, priorities, interests do you give to justify what it is that you want? That, of course, then converts into behavior. The actual going out and finding the stuff that corresponds with the belief system, the worldview, sometimes it's called. And of course, that everything we consume takes, in Prisoners of the Sun, there's this phrase, everything that we become more of, nature becomes less, because we live in a finite system. So it's not just sunlight, it's not just energy, it's the materials as well. The notion of ecological footprint, which came before carbon footprint, is about the energy and the materials and how much is needed to produce all of that. So it also produces waste because, of course, fashion, not just the fashion industry, but fashions, school crazes, if you like, made into adult things, means that we're constantly changing and wanting new styles. And this feels like something very similar to, if we can't get it, it's like being starved. So there is this sort of psychocultural survival. I need to survive, but psychologically, culturally, and it all produces waste as well. Physically, it produces waste. It has to then be disposed of. So, Yeah, that's survival in style.
Mm. So you talked about the consuming mode, which relates to survival and style, and then the alternative is what you call that contextualizing mode. Can you explain like what that would look like for someone to explore or step more into a contextualizing approach to life?
There's a sense of wonder in it. If you can connect with your sense of wonder, a sense of awe, that wowness of basic existential questions too, but psycho-spiritual existential questions. How come I'm here? How come this has all happened? How come there's this blue dot in the universe of mostly blackness, and with blackness with twinkles, nothingness with twinkles? And how come this flourishing, this diversity of life has come from what? A big bang? From a kind of what another person has called John Martin Sahajananda has called the non-conscious, non-differentiated unity, that origin to this process of evolution, essentially in a nutshell, which is about increasing diversity of species, of all sorts of things. But species essentially becomes all sorts of things in the human world, or even in the non-human, the other than human world. And a deepening of complexity. So a more complexity. So this complexity that we're demonstrating now of being able to reflect on ourselves, each other, on our world, on ourselves, this reflexive capacity allows us to go to say, wow, yes, to find me, it is possible to find meaning in being part of something bigger. It doesn't damage the ego. It doesn't assault the ego, sense of I. By ego, I simply mean sense of I, sense of oneself. It actually gives it more depth, I think, to know that rather than trying to fill up a gap, a perennial, constant gap inside myself by consuming, be it literally consuming food, alcohol, cigarettes, cars, stuff, but also there's a very insidious kind of spiritual consumerism too, whereby I'm going to have this experience. This experience is mine. This experience of oneness is mine. But without the reciprocity, so there is a kind of shape. It goes, you have the experience, and then it goes out again. So, what are the implications of this experience for how I actually live my life? How I contribute as a participant member of this amazing thing that I'm part of. And remembering that you're part of it is simply is a good start, actually. It's putting oneself in context.
So to bring it more into the practical realm of how people can start to implement this in their day-to-day lives, from like personally from working with you and taking your course, I started to think more deeply about my place in the ecosystem, and even like little things like it's so obvious, but thinking about how when I'm eating food that it's like sunlight energy that has then been photosynthesized into sugar, and then I'm like eating that sunlight. It just made me think on deeper levels about what I was doing, or even things like I remember learning that when you put nutrients into a landfill, that then those nutrients will never again be recycled. And like a natural part of the ecosystem is that our resources get continually used over and over. So now I feel kind of this like physical pain when I have to put something into the landfill. I understand what I'm doing differently, and it gets to a point where it's so painful that I'm like, okay, I'm motivated to do composting and to take different actions. I'd love to hear you talk about more about these everyday choices and why that's really important.
Or just chuck your apple core on a flower bed. That keeps this precious fertility soil that has taken millions of years cycling, being used and reused to form. And when you put an apple core in the bin, what I call the landfill bin, and either it's burnt or it's buried, as you said, actually it is recycled, but not as soil. If it's landfilled, it eventually will decompose anaerobically without air, rather than in the normal way, the functional way, I think I would say. And it becomes methane, which is 20 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, or some people are even saying 25 times. So, or if it's burned, well, yes, it becomes carbon dioxide. So I think what you said is really touches me, because that's the, I've often, I don't know, in something I wrote many years ago, these changes have to be heartfelt. They have to be heartfelt. We have to really feel them in your body, as you were just expressing. Because if it's just economic incentives, you can make, I don't need to go into it, economic incentives or legislative punitive measures, then it taps into the same old consumer mode. And once the incentive's taken away or the law is broken, which is always the tendency with laws, isn't it, to try and break them in these little ways anyway, to find the loopholes, that's what I mean to say, then nothing has really changed. It's shallow. It's shallow. It's not looking beneath the surface. This, I think what you're alluding to is the notion of everyday attention, or attention to everyday little activities, as a psycho-spiritual and ecological spiritual practice. Because everything we do, every little decision we make, every little action we take, either contributes to the sustaining the integrity of the ecosystem and the life support systems, ecological life support systems, or contributes to its disintegration. So that's what it's about. And, spiritual practice everywhere is about, is it not really, in its heart, about the integrity, about the oneness? It's non-dual. Even the Abrahamic traditions are non-dual, actually. Then there's a complexity there, but it's all about the one creation, the one ever-evolving creation, but it's still one. As John Martin Sahajananda says, it's that movement from non-differentiated unity to differentiated unity, the harmony of the parts, the naming of the parts Gregory Basin talks about, the patterns that connect. So we can this is everyday life can be a spiritual practice of being part of or not part of, through attention to whether my actions and decisions are, and we can never do this definitively, but it's always a process, contributing to the integrity, the continuing integrity, or the continuing disintegration. And it's everything. I mean, you've seen my brainstormed list of things. I no longer use plastic pens. Now, this is about habits. It's about paying attention to our habits, which are culturally imbued in us. And one day I thought, I'd seen photos of turtles with pens through their mouths and all sorts of other plastic things. And I thought, what can I do? It's really hard to stop using plastic for food. Very hard indeed. And that's another thing. Sorry, brackets. I'm going to come back to the plastic pen, all right? But the biodegradable plastic bags. Now, here's another habit. It's very illustrative of how powerful habits and beliefs are. After all, they save time, don't they, if we don't have to think about it? But we do have to think about it. Because the habit is to put biodegradable plastic bags in the bin. They might say all over them, compostable, but they go in the bin because the association is with plastic, and dog poo bags as well. And the dog poo goes in the bin, into landfill, methane, loss to the ecosystem, to the very thin, fertile layer of the ecosystem. So don't put anything of a biological origin in the bin. Just don't. Put it in the compost or flick it into the leaves, Not the real plastic, just the biodegradable stuff. Tissues. How many tissues do we use in cafes all the time? Well, why don't we reuse them for something and have a bin in our bathroom that we can, we can put them in and use them for other things? Use your imagination. But the plastic pens, just one day I saw that, I thought, I had all these plastic pens. Why have I got all these plastic pens? So ever since then, I've just not used plastic pens. I've used pencils, because pencils are compostable. So long as they're not those clever pencils that are made out of plastic cups, because then you sharpen them, you imagine in that case that it is biodegradable. Along come the microplastics. It's just about using your thinking in a different way, systemic thinking. I could reel off a whole list, but yeah.
I've seen your list. I tried to implement as many as possible, but yes, for this interview, I used Amazon and I sent you some headphones, and the Amazon shopping habit is one of the things to be conscious of.
It is one of them, yeah.
Thinking about the resources used, the packaging, the fossil fuels that are wasted in doing that.
The clicking on websites.
Yeah.
What we're doing here is
using
the servers heating up. They're massive. Yeah. And we're moving more and more and more and more towards more of it.
Yeah. So, in trying to share these ideas with people in my circles, a common response is like, well, most of the impact on the ecosystem is coming from corporations who are like burning fossil fuels. Like, it's not really to do with the individual, and like, what impact can I as one person have? So I'd love to hear your response to this.
And I'll do that. But I would like to flag something up that I'd like to talk about, because I think there will be people listening to this who'll say, yes, but renewables, that's the answer. And I want to come back to that, because it's yet another avoidance of the deeper transformation, which is necessary. And I'll explain why in relation to that proposition. I think it relates to your current question as well, because for me now, yes, I know, it's relatively new in the public consciousness, this threat to our home planet, to Earth. Let's just call it Earth. We don't talk about the Jupiter, the Mars. We talk about the Earth as though it's somehow over there. It is Earth, and Earth is in us, and we are in it, and there is no getting away from that, even if we do go to the Mars. And I know that this, now that it's mainstream, people are very frightened and anxious. There's a lot of eco-anxiety therapy going on. People are very frightened because they're going to lose something that, in a way, even in environmental circles, is framed in consuming mode. It's about what I'm going to lose, what I can't have anymore, or what my grandchildren won't have. Or, for me, I don't think it's about saving the earth. Hey, see, I did it. Saving Earth anymore. I mean, it is, of course it is. It always has been my whole life. But saving puts it again over there. We do all these subtle ways of detaching ourselves. And no, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I can't do very much as an individual. And that I can use that as an excuse. But like you, to do that just hurts. I can't do that. It hurts. It actually hurts. Because I know that it sometimes feels as though, and this is part of a kind of answer to the previous question, one of them, that because I am part of Earth, and we're all part of Earth, Earth is actually speaking through us. We are expressions of Earth. And in what you were describing and what I'm relating to, it's as if something, it's like I'm experiencing what Earth is experiencing because I'm part of it. And I can't do it. So simply being someone who is an organism, let's just call myself an organism, that is able to reflect and wanting, because volition is so important, we have to want to do it. This is the heartfelt thing. To be living in that way, even if it's just a tiny, tiny little speck, which I am and you are, gives meaning to my life. And that's what it's about. It's about living deeply, living systemically, living ecosystemically, living, as I see it, helping to transpersonalize this earth through those that choose to do it. So we become a little bit of, I don't know, a little evolutionary impulse. I think that's worth it, no matter what happens. No matter what happens.
So for people who don't know what transpersonalizing means, could you just briefly explain your definition of the transpersonal?
The universe, the earth, the cosmos, the divine, through its own creation, is trying to become conscious of itself. Right? And we are a species that can do that. And in so doing, we become the transpersonalizing agents. So it's more than us, but it's not for us. If we're just taking from what's called the transpersonal, then actually we're using it for personal purposes, not transpersonal purposes. In order for it to become transpersonal purpose, we have to actually do that, complete that circuit and reciprocate and say, it's not all about me. It's about my role in bringing consciousness and harmony, because the name for unity in diversity is harmony. That's what I have to do if it's to be really transpersonal, because transpersonal has to be, the transpersonal has to become conscious, and it can only become conscious through conscious parts of itself, which is us, and possibly hippopotamuses, possibly hippopotami, rhinos, yes, ants, maybe. We don't know, but it can be. We know it can be through us, and we're constantly avoiding it.
Okay, so go on then. What's the thing about the renewable energy?
All right, well, this is back to Prisoners of the Sun, in the third part of Prisoners of the Sun, and they're all worth watching. The first part is about soil. Second part is about basic ecosystem dynamics using the African savanna as the illustration, and the third is more about money and fossil fuels as parts of the overall ecosystem and the beliefs that go with it. And towards the end of the third part, so I'm a bit of a spoiler, I suppose, but this is 1992. They show this amazing sterile machine. It's not sterile. It's very, very, very powerful. It is the experimental nuclear fusion reactor at Culham in Oxfordshire. Now, nuclear fusion, that's not nuclear fission. And it says, so what is this? This is sunlight itself. A machine for generating electricity by nuclear fusion. Uses very little. It doesn't even use uranium, I don't think. No, it doesn't. I don't know the technicalities, but there is no pollution. There is massive energy, like the energy of the sun, as it says, every creature's dream. Every creature's dream to have maximum sunlight with no damage, only a little bit of water as a byproduct. Every creature's dream. And then there's this pregnant pause, and it says, and if we have managed to do to the rest of nature what we've done to it with fossil fuels, just imagine what we'll be able to do to it with this. I went, this was 92, click, click, click. This is not about technology. Whatever powerful technology we have, we will use in the same way until we transform our mode of meaning, of how we try to find meaning. And it was a key thing in me eventually, training as a psychotherapist. At least it prompted me to start asking the more psychological questions about the blocks and the catalysts to this more fundamental second order change, or even third order change, spiritual change. This is proper spiritual change. It's grounded. Spirit is grounded. Teilhard de Chardin. Yes, Teilhard de Chardin. He talked about the spiritualization of matter. And in other words, finding that into integratedness and the materialization of spirit. They must go together. How can we do it if we're not in bodies? How can we do anything? Yeah. So.
Yeah, because the thing is, even if we had renewable energy, we would still have that consuming and that desire, and you never get to a place of feeling content or whole.
No.
You always have that need for more and more and more. So yeah, the contextualizing mode results in more peace.
So it's how to reorientate that desire. Yeah. I'm not homing in on the Sufis for any particular reason, though it's a wonderful tradition.
I've been reading Hafiz, so it's very aligned with what I've been reading.
Oh, have you? Right. Well, this came from contemporary Bakhiar, that's her name. She describes two modes of what she calls guidance. One is called Takwini guidance, and the other is called Tashri guidance. Now, Tashri guidance equates with the kind of contextualizing mode, whereby I listen to what the Christic tradition describes as the still small voice within, but it's not just that, it's everywhere. What is this? Some quiet voice. I sometimes call it the whispering voice, because everything else shouts at us about how it should be, but this whispers, it doesn't shout. And if we can listen to that, it's more likely to lead us towards something that really feels true for us. Now, and by true, I love that word. It means aligned. And it comes from the Sanskrit word meaning tree as well. The aligning of spirit and matter, heaven and earth, nature, through the trunk gate. And that equates to contextualizing orientation, because It's about being part of the bigger, of something bigger, and what's my role within it. If we don't listen to that, Bakhiar points out, the default position is what equates to the consuming mode, the consuming orientation, whereby we're driven by the instincts that we share with everything. So there is a certain pull out that humans have to do from that. I mean, it's so ironic that a biological instinct is what's responsible for this dysfunctional behavior.
How worried are you about the state of Earth and what's happening?
You know, back in 1999, I wrote an article. It was for a millennium. It was for the millennium, and I ended it by saying, having quoted something about this, we are a species that can, as it were, be the awareness of the universe becoming conscious of itself, because that's what we are. It's what we can be. And does that have something to do with the niche, our particular, to use the systemic evolutionary term, the emergent property that nature, that Earth is coming up with, that we don't know if it's existed in other species, but anyway, we know it exists in us. This capacity to be that part of the ecosystem that reflects on itself, or to be a part of the ecosystem that reflects on itself, to the extent that we do, in a human way, not in an elephant way, not in a hippo way, or in an ant way, but in a human way. And if we don't do that, if we don't step into that, and we just carry on being driven by this basic consuming growth instinct, well, what a pity that would be. Because it's continuing to destroy. We could destroy ourselves, we could destroy so many other species, as we already have. You know, the white rhino was already in danger of extinction when I was 7 years old. It was one of the animals that stimulated me to get into this. But Earth is such, I think you said at the beginning, destroying Earth. Well, no, we won't destroy Earth, not as such, but we will destroy Earth in its current condition. And it could take billions of years, because the trajectory of evolution is to increasing diversity and deepening complexity, billions of years to come up with another species that can try again. So I'm just disappointed. It's such a disappointment. I used to think, I remember when I was 14 thinking, ecology and the oneness of everything and how it all interrelates, it's just amazing and obvious. And 10 years' time, everything will be different. Well, that was a long time ago.
Sometimes I consider the idea that the degradation of the ecosystem isn't happening at a rate that is distressing enough for us as humans to be like, oh my gosh, we have to do something now. Like with the COVID pandemic, for example, it was like, okay, disaster situation, everyone stay home. There were measures that were taken that haven't been taken since wartime. So, this last week, we've had a lot of smoke coming across the US from the Canadian forest fires, and it's horrible. But there's part of me that's like, I think it would be better to have more of that now rather than allowing these time lags to happen and then it's too late. Do you have any comments on that idea?
I'm not sure, Kaz. I'm not sure about that. Because it goes with an assumption that the worse it gets, there is this assumption that all we have to do is go through real crisis and then we will change. But that's one of the very things that doesn't take account of our psychology and the psychology of resistance and denial. The power of this instinct that says, no, I've got to survive. The harder it gets, the more people are going to want to survive unless they've gone through some sort of shift in orientation. And that's very scary. I think that's very scary. You only have to look at history to see what happens when people feel threatened.
Yeah, so crisis situations would increase those survival instincts, which would make us act even more out of alignment.
Yeah. And the thing about coronavirus, it was very, very specific to us. This ecosystemic breakdown will never be like that. We'll always be able to find a way out. But this was something that got inside us and threatened us directly. Way back, gosh, in the 80s or 90s, people used to talk about complex environmental problems and simple, or complex problems and simple problems. And seatbelts is a simple one because it just involves one action, one change of habit. But the ecological predicament involves the changing of whole ways of being, whole sets of values, whole priorities, whole sets of interests at every level in society, in a human life. And so I get what you're saying. If only we could have more pressure, but the psychological effects of that worry me. But they worry me because of the disappointment that we don't actually have a bloody good look at what we're doing, collectively and individually. Collective's often a deflection from the individual, I think. But the actual path, the actual transformation, the actual meaning comes from the individual. You can say we're conditioned by this, that, and the other, but there is always the opportunity to respond, and respond reflectively in a thinking way and a feeling way, of course. Yeah. But feeling without the thinking can lead us back into the instinct again. That's important, I think.
So if you had to summarize your greatest hope for humanity, what would your message be? What's the ultimate thing you want to share with people?
Let's really recognize what we have been trying to tell ourselves for thousands of years through the really deep wisdoms that have been part of us. And there have always been a few in every culture, in every religion, in every time in history that have understood this ecosystemic way of meaning, if you like, this ecosystemic awareness. But the power of this instinct just seems to lead them to being ostracized. The King of England now, the King of Britain, the King of the UK, the King of, I don't know, yeah, the United Kingdom King, what we call him. Anyway, King Charles. He has been ridiculed throughout his life for talking about harmony. People don't know that he wrote a book called Harmony, A New Way of Looking at the World, which starts by saying, this is a call to revolution, a sustainability revolution. But we have to not just campaign, but understand the systemic outlook, the systemic, the kind of the natural grammar of the ecosystem, and that we and our beliefs and our meanings and our values and our psychologies are all part of it. Yeah, I mean there are plenty of people there who are describing this, but they tend to get marginalized.
And where do you source your hope from? And are you hopeful that humanity can get their act together and come into alignment?
Oh, nice way of putting it. Come into alignment with nature, with the ecosystem, yeah, with Earth. I'm not very hopeful, no, that they can in time. I think, well, let me rephrase that. I think this is a little argument, light-hearted but argumentative dialogue I have with an ecologist friend of mine, Oliver. And I say we can, because we all have the same sort of brains. We're all human. We can do it. We are able to do it, but we lack the will. We have the capacity, but we lack the will. And he says, well, maybe we can't do it. Maybe we, as a whole species, we don't have the capacity. Maybe there are some people that just can't think that way. I don't know. But I think what I'm coming to is that we seem to lack the capacity. So many of us lack the capacity to have that will, to decide to do it. And that's so sad. That's what I find, because I think we can. We have the hard wiring. Okay, maybe that's quite a good metaphor. We have the hard wiring, but we kind of lack the software. We got the wrong software for doing it, for using that hard wiring in a transformative way.
Do you have any ideas on what it would take for a big significant shift to happen?
Well, that's the question that I ask you in the course, isn't it? What do you think it would take? I don't know. There's always this factor X. Why one person and not another? And I don't know how to answer that. Why did I get that happening when I was so young that set me up on this? I don't know. And then once you've had it, of course, then there's the possibility that you can roll back down the hill. The boulder rolls back down the hill, and it just becomes. That's why I think we have carbon footprint rather than ecological footprint, because carbon you can always make a profit from. You can make a business of all different sorts, but stopping extinction, pausing and stopping so that the ecosystem can recover rather than try and be fixed by our technologies, that's never going to make a profit. And it doesn't get quantified. It can't be quantified. People have tried. So we need a shift from we need to recognize that without the qualitative, without the forest, there is no timber. Without the life support system, there is no timber which can be cut down and sold. The quantitative depends on the qualitative, but in economics, and what we constantly try to do is shove the qualitative into a quantitative frame, and therefore you always lose the quality. You believe, maybe, that by having more money, we're going to have a better quality of life. Maybe. Have a look at Affluenza, the book by Oliver James. It's not doesn't necessarily follow. So to value the qualitative as the qualitative, I think this is a key thing. Yeah. And that takes a big shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like one of the Native American traditions would look at, like a tree having essential worth in itself as a living being. And they, instead of calling a tree a rock, they use like pronouns, like as if it's like a living being and like has an essence in itself. Whereas in our Western worldview, we just look at the natural world as things and resources.
They probably have a pronoun that's non-gender.
Yes.
Non-gendered.
Paul, is there anything else you'd like to share that I haven't asked you about?
I think there's one thing I'd like to say, actually, and that's that this peer pressure is really, really powerful. Because it can make you feel really lonely. The changing deep, that's another thing I think I'll roll into this. That the to be the transpersonalizing influence of Earth, organ of Earth, if you like. If Earth is an organism, what is our role in that organism? To be, and as I say, other species may be doing it too, but we can only know what we're doing and what we're ignoring and neglecting. We can know ourselves as something more than just ourselves. That's what all this spiritual experience is about. To feel the oneness that we're part of. But we need the reciprocity too. We need to say, not just thank you, transpersonal, or thank you, God, or thank you, whatever language you want to use for what you've given me. Well, okay. And then we ask for it to bless what we receive. But the circuit needs to be completed. Therefore, I am that. That's an ancient saying. I am that I am. That's from the Kabbalistic Judaic. Moses said to Moses on Mount Sinai, I am that. So if I am that, then what am I giving? What am I giving back? What am I contributing to this circuit, to this metabolism? And I think what we can do, which is it's so necessary if we're going to get through this, is that to offer that transpersonalizing role in the ecosystem so that it can become the conscious trans person through the persons that it has itself brought into existence, right? Through billions of years of evolution. And it's not new, it is ancient, but it's becoming very urgent now, that this, because without it, we will just keep doing this. We will, one way or another, in more and more sophisticated ways, we will just keep orientating like that rather than that. And it can be so lonely, that's the thing. It can be really hard to find kindredness with others that are doing that. But as I say, there is an inherent meaningfulness in it that can come for life, even though it's lonely. And it's great when you meet other people like you, you know. Yeah, fantastic.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a delight to talk to you. And I'm hopeful that the more that there are people like us who wake up to this information, that there could be like a significant transformation on our planet in the future. So please keep what you're doing, because I know that you affect your students significantly, like me.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I need that actually, because it can be hard with this disappointment thing. I guess there is hope there, but optimism, it's sort of, I know that people can do it. I think my hope is in that I know people can do it, whether they will choose to. But yeah, thank you. I'll keep doing it then. Thank you.
Yeah. And if nothing else, my life feels a lot more deep and meaningful thanks to everything that you've taught me.
When people say things like that, and I know it does make it all worthwhile, because it can't happen without it. I don't think it can happen without it.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Kaz.
Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Paul Maiteny. If you would like to find out more about Paul, you can find his videos on Vimeo. You can find his articles on academia.edu. And if you feel like you're interested in joining his transpersonal eco-psychology course, you can do so as an open learner. It's a 10-week course. The next one starts in February 2024. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can find the details at alephtrust.org. I'll put all of these links in the show notes. Please subscribe to this podcast It really helps me if you take a screenshot of this episode and share it on your social media. It helps if you leave a nice comment on YouTube. It helps if you know someone who'd be interested in this episode, if you could share it with them via an email or a text message. We have been growing exponentially, and it is thanks to people like you who just take a second to share. So thank you so much for supporting me and my voice and giving a platform to these amazing thinkers. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you next time. Until then, take care. Before I go, I would like to give a shout out to Zachary Walter, who composed the gorgeous music that you hear in this episode. If you'd like to find out more about him and his musical compositions, check out zacharywaltermusic.com.